York, this is Democracy Now!
You are failing us. But the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg gives an impassioned address to world leaders at the UN Climate Action Summit. But the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters make few new commitments to address the climate crisis. President Trump attended the summit for just 14 minutes. We speak to the prize-winning writer Ta-Nehisi Coates about slavery, the power of memory, and reparations. His first novel is out today.
The Water Dance is the story of Hiram Walker, who is an enslaved African-American who is the son of a slave master and the child of a woman who that slave master in turn sold off. He wants what I think most, enslaved people wanted, what 4 million enslaved people in 1860 wanted most, and that's freedom.
Ta-Nehisi Coates on The Water Dancer. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The UN Climate Action Summit kicked off in New York Monday with world leaders calling for action to prevent apocalyptic climate change. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said his generation had, quote, failed in its responsibility to protect our planet. 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg fought back tears as she gave an impassioned address.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you!
President Trump later mocked the now world-renowned activist on Twitter, writing, quote, "She seems like a very happy young girl looking forward to a bright and wonderful future. So nice to see," he said. Meanwhile, youth climate activists filed an official complaint under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, calling on world leaders to protect future generations from climate catastrophe. We'll have more on the historic action and what took place at the summit yesterday after headlines. President Trump made a brief and unexpected stop at the UN Climate Action Summit before moving to a UN session on religious freedom where he committed $25 million to, quote, protect religious freedom, religious sites and relics, unquote. Meanwhile, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar urged world leaders at the UN General Assembly to cut the term reproductive health and rights when speaking about health care. Azar said these, quote, ambiguous terms can help, quote, promote practices like abortion. The Washington Post reporting President Trump ordered a hold on $400 million in military aid to Ukraine about 1 week before he spoke to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and pressured him to investigate Joe Biden's son and his business interests in Ukraine. This according to 3 top administration officials. Trump has acknowledged discussing Joe Biden and his son Hunter with the Ukrainian president, but insists there was no quid pro quo. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy said Monday Zelensky told him that he believed the aid was cut off because he refused to launch such an investigation. Senator Murphy said, quote, there's an implicit threat in every demand that a United States president makes of a foreign power. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now reportedly consulting with Democratic lawmakers on whether to impeach Trump over the mounting scandal. The British Supreme Court has ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament is unlawful. Brenda Hale, head of the British Supreme Court, said the prorogation was not justified and has no effect. It's not yet known what action Boris Johnson, who's in New York for the UN General Assembly, will take in response to the historic ruling. Britain, France and Germany said in a joint statement Monday Iran is responsible for attacks on Saudi oil facilities earlier this month. Last week, Saudi Arabia also said said the attacks were, quote, unquestionably sponsored by Iran. Iran has denied they were responsible for the attacks, which have been claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, said in an interview Sunday he's not confident that Iran and the U.S. would be able to avoid war, but that Iran would not be the one to start it. Trump is expected to address Iran during his statement at the UN today. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who's rejected the possibility of talks with the U.S., is set to speak Wednesday. On Monday, Democracy Now! Spoke with the Iraqi president, Barham Saleh, at the UN about escalating tensions in the region.
Mr. President, a quick question about the possibility of Saudi Arabian war with Iran and the U.S.
We hope to avert a war. The last thing the region needs is another war.
In Afghanistan, at least 40 civilians were killed by U.S. and Afghan forces as they attended a wedding Sunday evening. The civilians are believed to have been caught in the crossfire of a raid on a Taliban hideout. At least 22 members of the Taliban were also killed and 14 arrested in the operation, according to the Afghan Ministry of Defense. The attack came after the U.S. killed at least 30 farmers in a drone attack in eastern Afghanistan last week, and as the country prepares for presidential elections on Saturday. In Haiti, an Associated Press photojournalist was shot in the face when a senator opened fire on a crowd of protesters outside of Parliament Monday. Charlie Nalio was wounded but survived the shooting. A security guard was also injured. Haitian Senator Jean-Marie Ralph Fetière later claimed he drew the gun in self-defense. The protest came as the government of President Jovenel Moïse was attempting to push through the confirmation of a new prime minister, Fritz-William Michel. Anti-government protests have rocked Haiti for months, calling on the president to step down over accusations of corruption and mismanagement of Haiti's economy. In China, drone footage posted on YouTube appears to show police leading hundreds of blindfolded and shackled Uyghur or other minority prisoners at a train station in Xinjiang. The disturbing video shows blindfolded men with shaved heads sitting in rows on the ground before being led away by police. China has been accused of cultural genocide against the Uyghur population. Over 1 million ethnic Uyghur Muslims and other Muslim minorities are believed to be imprisoned in internment camps, and countless children separated from their families. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and rival candidate Benny Gantz are in negotiations over a proposed power-sharing deal. President Reuven Rivlin pushed for a unity government and talks with involved parties after neither leader's party was able to secure a victory in last week's elections. Negotiations are now focused on who will lead the government first, according to far-right former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman. Benny Gantz had previously rejected a unity government with Netanyahu, who's facing indictments over 3 corruption cases. Back in the U.S., the FBI arrested an active-duty soldier who's suspected of sharing online instructions on how to build bombs and discuss killing anti-fascist activists as well as bombing a news network, reportedly CNN. 24-year-old Jarrett William Smith also named presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke as a possible target. Smith also posted online about wanting to fight for a far-right group in Ukraine, according to prosecutors. He could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. And investigators say the Federal Aviation Administration misled Congress about safety inspections for the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. Safety inspectors charged with training requirements for 737 pilots were underqualified, according to the investigation, which arose from a whistleblower complaint. 2 Boeing 737 MAX airplanes, Indonesia's Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, crashed 5 months apart, killing all 346 people on board. On Monday, Boeing announced it'll begin paying out $50 million in financial assistance to the families of the victims of the 2 crashes. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Scores of world leaders gathered in New York on Monday for the UN Climate Action Summit. But the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters announced few new measures to address the climate crisis. President Trump briefly attended the summit, but left after just 14 minutes. Near the beginning of the summit, 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg gave an impassioned address to world leaders.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg speaking at the United Nations on Monday. Greta was later seen glaring at President Trump as he passed near her inside the United Nations. Meanwhile, Greta Thunberg and 15 other youth climate activists from around the world filed a complaint Monday with the United Nations, accusing 5 major countries of violating the Convention on the Rights of the Child by failing to protect children from the devastating impacts of the climate crisis. Greta and the other petitioners spoke at the UNICEF headquarters.
My name is Alexandra Villasenor. I'm 14 years old. I'm from New York. And I'm here because 30 years ago, the world signed a contract between generations that the present world would leave a world worth inheriting to the future. And today, I want to tell the world, you are defaulting on that contract, and we're here to collect.
Oka yurtan atka taqiqaruq hakaqam miungunga Hi, my name is Carl Smith. I'm Yupik from Akak, Alaska, and I'm 17 years old. I'm here because climate change is affecting the way I live. It has taken away my home, the land, and the animals.
Yahweh, my name is Rantanan Jane. I'm 17 years old, and I'm from the Marshall Islands. And I'm here because climate change is destroying my islands through sea level rise and storms.
Hola, mi nombre es Kiara Sachi, tengo 17 años y soy de Buenos Aires, Argentina. Hi, good morning. My name is Kiara Sachi. I am 17 years old and I am from Argentina. I am here today because I have things to say, and I am here today in behalf of my people. Argentina is suffering from a climate crisis, and I think we need to decide on which side of the wick are we, and we need to do it now.
Hello, my name is David Ackley. I'm 16-year-old from Marshall Islands. I'm here today because my islands are drowning and I'm here to stop it.
Olá, meu nome é Catarina Lorenzo, eu tenho 12 anos, eu sou de Salvador, Bahia, Brasil. Hello, my name is Catarina Lorenzo, I'm 12 years old and I'm from Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. I'm here to demand all the world leaders to listen to us and to help us stop climate change together. In Salvador, Brazil, the government throw and dump sewage on the river, which goes to the ocean, in which we cannot go swim or surf because we will get sick. I'm saying this because this is the right thing to say, and this is the truth. And this is our life that is being harmed in our future.
Ali, my name is Carlos Hans Manuel. I'm 17 and I'm from Palau. I am here because I want my voice to be heard. I want bigger countries to know that our small island nations are the most vulnerable countries to be affected by climate change. Our homes are slowly being swallowed up by the ocean. The places where memories were made. The places where trust and respect were gained. The places where we used to have fun and enjoy. It's really sad to say, but those places, they're slowly disappearing. I am standing in front of you because I care about my generation. I care about my future generation. I want a better life for us, a better future. And the most important thing, I want a better planet for us to live in. Thank you.
Guten Morgen, ich heiße Raina Ivanova, ich bin 15 Jahre alt und ich komme aus Hamburg. Good morning, everyone. My name is Raina Ivanova and I'm 15 years old. I'm from Hamburg, Germany. And I'm here today because the climate change is not just affecting all of us. It's affecting every single person in this room and every single human being on our planet. And I want you to take your responsibility and make decisions today you can still be proud of in 11 years. Thank you.
Yahweh, my name is Tokune Kapua, and I am from the Marshall Islands. I am here because I am going to speak on behalf of my people because we are on the front line of climate crisis, and I am here to stop that.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम रिधिमा पांडे है. मैं 11 साल की हूँ और मैं इंडिया से हूँ. Hello everyone, my name is Ridhima Pandey. I'm 11 years old and I'm from India. I'm here because I want all the global leaders to do something to stop climate change, because if it's not going to be stopped, it's going to harm our future. So if we want to stop global warming, we have to do something now.
Hello everyone, First of all, I'd like to introduce this little sweet girl. This is Ellen Annie from the community of Sweden. She's 8 years old, and she's here today because she loves reindeer, and she wants to take care of it when she gets old. And the problem is that reindeer in her country are suffering from the food shortages, and that's why she's here today. السلام عليكم. أنا اسمي رسلان جبالي. جيتكم من تونس وأنا عمري 17 سنة. Hello everyone, my name is Jbali Ruslan, I'm 17 years old and I'm from Tunisia. I came here today to tell you that I want my voice to get heard by my country, which is one of the most countries that are suffering from climate change. And I want to tell you that climate change is definitely coming and we must prepare for confrontation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adegbile Deborah. I'm 12 and I'm from Nigeria. And I'm here to make an impact and represent my country.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Iris Duquesne, j'ai 16 ans et je viens de France. Hi, my name is Iris Duquesne, I'm 16 and I'm from France. I'm here because climate change is affecting my country economically, but it's also affecting me personally.
Jag heter Greta Thunberg och jag är 16 år gammal. My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 16 years old. And I'm doing this because world leaders are failing to protect the rights of the child by continuing to ignore the climate and ecological crisis.
Greta Thunberg and other young people speaking at UNICEF headquarters about their new complaint filed with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. In other news from the UN Climate Action Summit, a number of indigenous leaders from Brazil traveled to New York to protest Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's push to open up the Amazon rainforest for agribusiness, logging and mining. Democracy Now!'s Nermeen Sheikh spoke to Chief Raoni of the Kayapo tribe on Monday. He talked about the situation in the Amazon, including the recent outbreak of devastating fires.
Today, there are many things happening in Brazil. In the previous government, it wasn't like this. It wasn't so bad. Now, the Bolsonaro government is authorizing deforestation. He's authorizing the entrance of wildcat miners and loggers and mining companies into indigenous territories. This is bad because it will destroy everything. It will destroy the forest, destroy the Amazon. It will be bad for us in the future. This is what I defend. I don't defend standing virgin forests just for me. No, I'm thinking of the future, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren living in peace in this forest. So what Bolsonaro is doing is very bad for me.
Do you have any hope that something will happen at this summit? I mean, Bolsonaro is not here. President Trump is in the building, but he's not attending the climate summit. What do you hope will happen to save the Amazon here, if anything?
I hope that something good comes out of this gathering. I hope they decide to help the Amazon and the environment. I hope that here in this gathering, they help the Amazon to remain. This is what I want. I don't want people to be in conflict. We need to live in peace, to live well, to live without conflict. This is what I think. I always say this, and this is what I say now. This is my thinking. For you to hear that we should live in peace, without fights, without problems, without conflict, this is what I think.
And what are indigenous groups like your own people doing to resist Bolsonaro's policies in the Amazon?
We Kayapo want to continue defending our lands, our forests, our future, and our people. This is what we think. We will resist. We will continue. I will continue speaking so that they in Brazil respect us, that they respect our culture, our customs, our land. I've been saying this, and I'm saying it again here. But destruction is happening around our area. Soy and corn planters are destroying all of the forest surrounding our land. But we, Kayapo, will resist. We will continue our struggle to not have invasions of miners, loggers, fishermen. This is what I do not like and do not accept.
You said the Amazon, which we know is very important for the survival of humanity, not just for the communities who've lived there. Explain why the Amazon is so important for the climate of the world.
I am seeing that the standing forest cools the land. The land becomes cold, becomes normal. If you deforest, as we are seeing deforestation, there will be no more trees to provide shade.
After the interview with Democracy Now!, Brazilian indigenous chief Raoni of the Kayapo tribe attempted to enter the UN Climate Action Summit. Despite support from dozens of activists, he was barred from entering. Earlier this month, a group of Brazilian anthropologists and environmentalists nominated him as a candidate for the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. Special thanks to Democracy Now!'s Tarina Nadura. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, our interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates. He has a new novel out. It's his first. It's called The Water Dancer. Stay with us. Mañana by Desaparecidos. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman, The Water Dancer. That's the name of Ta-Nehisi Coates' first novel, published today. It centers on a man named Hiram Walker, who was born into slavery in 19th century Virginia. A review in the New York Times calls The Water Dancer a, quote, crowd-pleasing exercise in breakneck and often occult storytelling that tonally resembles the work of Stephen King as much as it does the work of Toni Morrison, Colson Whitehead, and the touchstone African-American science fiction writer Octavia Butler. Over the past decade, Ta-Nehisi Coates has become one of the nation's most celebrated writers. In 2014, he wrote a piece titled The Case for Reparations, which rejuvenated the push for the government to pay reparations to the descendants of slaves. Earlier this year, Coates testified on Capitol Hill about reparations. His 2015 book, Between the World and Me, was written as a letter to his adolescent son. It won a National Book Award. In addition to his nonfiction writing, Ta-Nehisi Coates began writing comics in 2016, authoring his own Black Panther series. Now he's completed his first novel, The Water Dancer, out today. It was just unveiled as the first selection of Oprah's new book club. We spend the rest of the hour with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Juan Gonzalez and I spoke to him on Monday when he just came from meeting with Oprah. Ta-Nehisi, welcome back to Democracy Now! Congratulations. So you have just come from talking with Oprah. They just revealed this on CBS. Yeah. Talk about what this means to you.
Well, I mean, I would love to pretend like I don't care about the number of readers I have. I don't care who reads me, but that's actually not true. I think all or most authors, want to be read. And while on the one hand, I spent a lot of time, crafting the story, and I would have, the bottom line is for me to be proud of the story, for my editor to feel proud of the story. The endorsement, of Oprah, not just in terms of the readers, but to put me in the company of Colson Whitehead, who was just mentioned, to put me in the company of Tyree Jones, to put me in the company of Toni Morrison, is just gigantic. I mean, this is my first novel. So I have all sorts of insecurities and feelings, going on, and there's this long tradition of journalists writing really bad novels. And so I was like living in the back of my head. And so I'm overwhelmed. I'm absolutely overwhelmed.
Well, precisely on that, I wanted to ask you, as a journalist and as someone who's written principally nonfiction, why did you decide to take a stab at a novel? What could you do there that you couldn't do in your nonfiction
Yeah,
writing?
that's a great question, and it's multi-layered, actually. So the thing to understand is I actually started working on this in 2009. So what that means is that this book, at least in its inception, predates Between the World and Me, predates The Case for Reparations, predates the vast majority of the work in We Were 8 Years in Power. This is in many ways, one of my oldest published works. When I finished The Beautiful Struggle, my editor, which was my first book, it was a memoir, my editor felt like stylistically that, I would be successful if I tried fiction. And so I began, working in that spirit. But something else happened. Probably after The Case for Reparations, or after, I'd done, quite a bit of research and writing about the Civil War, it really became clear to me that you could make certain political arguments based on facts. You could have all the facts on your side. But for reasons that, reside somewhere deep in the imagination, people will just say no anyway. I think we see that with climate change denialism, for instance. But certainly I saw that, around the Civil War, that on some level facts did not matter, that people were attached to a deeper thing. And what I began to identify that deeper thing was myth. Many of the things that we were saying, it wasn't so much that, they were wrong objectively, but that they ran so hard and so counter to American myth. And so in many ways, this is an attempt to get at American myth, to get at, the things that reside much deeper than, the sort of objective facts that I was writing about in other works.
So you are now a storyteller. Tell us the story of The Water Dancer, starting with the title.
Sure. The Water Dancer is the story of Hiram Walker, who is an enslaved African-American who is the son of a slave master and the child of a woman who that slave master in turn sold off. He wants what I think most, enslaved people wanted, what 4 million enslaved people in 1860 wanted most, and that's freedom. The Water Dancer is his story of coming to understand that his individual freedom is actually tied to the larger, vision of freedom of the community into which he was born, and refining that idea of freedom and figuring out that, it means something much, much larger than anything he ever imagined.
But he's not just someone who was born into slavery and his mother was auctioned off at 5, but he also has magical powers.
He does.
Could you talk both in terms of memory and in terms of something called conduction?
Yes, sure, I can. I'm trying not to blow the book.
You can't blow it.
Yeah,
you can tell us the story, and even more people will want to read it.
So, I think the thing to understand is, for much of the research, I spent a lot of time reading slave narratives for this, and this is under, reported and not really talked about as much as it should be. But magic exists and is all through the world of enslaved black folks. When Frederick Douglass talks about, his first escape attempt, he talks about, one of his fellow enslaved African Americans giving him a root that'll grant him special powers. You read it in the narratives of the WPA, people talking about, putting graveyard dust in their shoes and how that, would give them magical powers to avoid the hounds. So I saw it in the literature, and it felt natural, to say nothing of, Harriet Tubman, who's in this book, and felt like, in many ways, a mystical figure. And so my mind, I like stories like that already, but my mind, immediately went to that, seeing that. In the case of Hiram, this power of conduction to move, from one place to another, and most importantly for him to move from, the land of slavery, the coffin of slavery, as he says, into the land of freedom, is deeply tied to memory. And he is a young man who has a photographic memory, who can remember everything except the things that are most important, and most personal to him. And it turns out that, this power of conduction is actually tied to that.
So tell us the year and tell us the place.
Yes,
Talk about the plantation and the family.
In my imagination, I'm hesitant to pin it to a year, but in my imagination, we were in late antebellum America. So I was thinking somewhere between 1830, 1850s. We're in Virginia. In my mind, we were in Western, Virginia, close to the mountains. I spent a lot of time researching at Monticello, actually. So there's a lot of influence of both, Thomas Jefferson, I think, kind of in conversation with that literature. A lot of influence of some of the great research that folks are doing, excavating the lives of enslaved black people at Monticello, that's in there. And so I was trying to, pull, all of that together and, just, make it into, some sort of, coherent story.
And the setting of the plantation where he is initially raised, he's the mixed race son. His mother was enslaved, and his father was the master of the plantation.
Yes.
Could you talk about the conditions in that plantation are not necessarily as horrific as many people are accustomed to understanding of slavery. Why you chose to make it sort of it was still slavery, but it was not as oppressive necessarily as other plantations.
So I would push back a little bit. I would say it was, but not in the way that we're used to. I think it's not that you're incorrect. It's just that the lens is shifted. So I think traditionally when we think about slavery, what we think about, what immediately comes to mind is physical torture, being beaten, being worked to death, all of the, horrible things that actually happen. And actually, again, in the course of researching this and looking at the narratives, probably the most painful thing I saw that struck me was family separation, which was basically, family separation for profit, during that period, totally legal, totally open, sometimes actually done by the state, to settle estates. Jefferson, for instance, died in debt, after living this lavish life. People were sold off, families were broken up to pay off his debt. And so I focused much more on that than some of the more visceral aspects of slavery that we think about. And I guess that's because when I thought about myself, when I put myself in that time, I tried to imagine myself being sold off from my wife, my son being sold off from me. And that probably was the thing that got me a lot more than, some of the other things that we associate with slavery.
So talk about Hiram's relationship with his slave owner father and his brother Maynard.
Yeah, it's a tough one. He starts from a place of deep, maybe not deep, definite admiration for his dad. He is clearly searching for some sort of parental, figure. His mother is gone. He's not prepared to face up to what happened and why his mother is gone, and his, dad's, agency in that, even though everyone around him is telling him, what actually happened. His dad is aware that he is a young man of particular intelligence, indeed, even perhaps more intelligent than his white, brother who, he has, who's, obviously through another a relationship, through, a more legitimate relationship. But the white brother is the heir to everything, even though, in his qualities, he's clearly not, somebody who, if, the father had his druthers, he would choose. But that's the situation, that's the society that they're living with. And so much of this book is him, coming to terms with who his father actually is and what he actually did, to his mother and accepting that.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, his first novel, The Water Dancer, came out today. After break, he'll read an excerpt from his new book and talk about the issue of reparations. Stay with us.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, hello, the Pharaoh, to let my people go.
This is Democracy Now! That's Paul Robeson, Go Down Moses. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue with Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the nation's most celebrated writers. Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed him Monday to discuss his first novel, The Water Dancer, just published today. Ta-Nehisi, you begin your book by quoting Frederick Douglass. My part has been to tell the story of the slave, the story of the master, never wanted for narrators. Could you start by reading a part of your book?
Sure.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is with us today. His book, his first novel, is called The Water Dancer.
I actually think that Douglas quote is quite appropriate to what I'm beginning to read. Story is a large part of this novel, and Hiram beginning to understand the story of African Americans who are resisting through escaping slavery is a big part of it. And so at this point, in the novel, he's actually grappling literally with the written oral stories of escaped African Americans, and he's beginning to understand his place in it. And in all of these words and in each of these stories, I saw as much magic as anything I'd seen in the Goose. Souls conducted as surely as I was from out of its depths. And I saw them coming up on railroads, barges, river runners, skiff, and Barbary coach. Coming up on horseback over hard snow and March melting ice. They were fitted in ladies' dress and came up, in gentry's clothes and came up, in dental bandage and came up, in sling and came up, in rags not worth the laundry ladies washing, but came up. They bribed low whites and stole horses, crossed the Potomac in wind, storm, and darkness, came up as I had, driven by the remembrance of mothers or wives sold south for the high crime of standing contrary before lust. They came up devoured by frost. They came up with tales of hard drinkers and overseers who took glee in applying the lash. They came up stowed like coffee in boats, braving turpentine, scarred and singed by saltwater anointings, guilt-racked for finding themselves so broken that they should bow before their own flocking for having held their brothers down under the lash. In the stories that day, I saw them running out into the forest, clutching a Brussels carpet bag, yelling, "I shall never be taken." I saw them boarding ferries, singing low and only to themselves. I saw them that day at the Philadelphia docks praying, "Hide the outcast, betray not him that wandereth." I saw them wandering on Bainbridge and crying for all their dead, those who had taken ship for the final harbor from whence none shall return. All of them came to me from the memories, all of them drawn up from pandemonium, up from slavery, up out of the jaw of the abomination, up out from under the juggernaut's wheels, singing before the sorcery of this underground.
I wanted that whole motif of memory. There's another section in the book where Hiram is in Philadelphia. He seeks out a mentor who others call Moses. It turns out it's Harriet Tubman. And at one point, he's walking with Tubman, and they're over the Delaware River. And she says, "Memory is the chariot, and memory is the way, and memory is bridge from the curse of slavery to the boom of freedom." In essence, is the power of Hiram's memory really represents what we Americans here lack in terms of our own understanding of the history of how our country came to be?
Yeah, well, what I will say is the thing is, like, conduction is, the power is always tied not just to memory, but like memories that maybe we would not like to talk about or deal with. It is the excavation of deep and often painful things that we would rather not, speak of. And one of the themes in the book is the extent to which the enslavers are themselves actually enslaved by their inability, to remember and to recall. And so, while I wouldn't tell anybody how to read the book, I certainly would say that there's some amount of allegory in that, in today, and how, even those who, are in power and are our governors are, in fact, enslaved by their inability to remember painful things that folks would rather, forget.
You mentioned Harriet Tubman, and she is a real figure in your fictional book, The Water Dancer. She also has the power of conduction, as you said. Talk about why you imbued her with this power and how significant she is for you.
So, the thing to understand is, first of all, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Harriet Tubman was from Maryland. My family on my mother's side is from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Harriet Tubman is from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And so she was probably my earliest notion of like a superhero. It really was. They were, these tales that they would tell us, some of them, exaggerations, but even when I got to reading and found out, the kernel of truth, they were still these incredible tales. And I can remember, when I was reading biographies, when I first started getting the idea to include her in the book, even in the biographies, you had this feeling that, I would say of the supernatural, of something really, really incredible. And so I just was attracted to that. I can remember, reading in one biography, that there's, they're trying to track the trails that she took, for some of these escapes. And the biographer says, I don't know. I mean, some of these we can't track. And anytime somebody doesn't know anything in nonfiction, my mind and my imagination immediately goes there, And so I just, I felt like it was really, really important. I will say one of the things I was afraid of, and one of the things I had to tackle repeatedly, was how to boil her down to an actual person, and not have like a slab of marble, walking through the book. And so I tried to do that, tried to give her humor, tried to do all of these, things. But yeah, she was probably my first notion of the superheroic.
You also write about the White family, who also is based on a real story, the William and Peter Still.
Yes.
Talk about how you researched this, how you knew them.
Yeah, so there's a great book on the Underground Railroad by a gentleman by the name of Fergus Broadwich that is just absolutely incredible. And in that, he pulls source material from a book that William Still published contemporaneously in the 19th century. It was basically a volume of all the enslaved folks who had escaped through, Philadelphia. And I mean, some of these is just, just incredible stuff that you read about. I mean, some of it, I was alluding to in the last, reading. As I said, people stuffed in boats, and folks putting in turpentine to try to, smoke out, or whatever to expose the slaves. People on the tops of carriages, people on the tops of rail cars. I mean, just crazy stuff, and it just excited me. I feel like a lot of times African-American history is presented in a kind of eat your vegetable sort of way. But if you read the accounts from the time, I mean, these folks, I think, have a great sense that they are involved in a great adventure. Obviously nobody likes being enslaved, but, you can almost see them like when I was reading William's stuff, I felt like he was pointing back at me saying, can you believe this stuff? Can you believe this? You know what I mean? That's how I felt, reading it. And so I was naturally, attracted, to him.
Hiram's power in the book is closely tied to water, and of course, it's The Water Dancer is the title of the book. Could you talk about water in this story? Yeah, I mean, for this goes back really old for me. When I would hear stories about the transatlantic slave trade, about the Middle Passage. There were all these stories about people that would leap off the boat, into the water, and there's some rather beautiful renditions of this of people reporting these folks, actually, leaped off. They seemed like they were dancing among the waves. I think I quote somebody, towards the end of the book saying that. I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about these, myths within African American culture of people flying, and so there was these notions that these people that leaped off the boat didn't actually, drown or go to the sharks. They actually flew, and so that was the immediate thing, I thought about. The very idea of the Middle Passage, it felt natural to use water. I was probably pulling some from my own biography, going back as a kid to the eastern shore of Maryland. We would very often, go to the beach. And it's something to be on the land where your ancestors were actually enslaved, and the ocean is right there. The ocean is like 10 miles away. And so water was always, I think, in the back of my mind. And so, again, it just felt natural to pull from that, when it came time to tell the story.
I also wanted to ask you about magical realism. Several novels that deal with slavery, like Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad, like the late Octavia Butler, and I encourage people to go to Democracy Now! To see our interview with her right before she died, have long used science fiction as a means to deal with these subjects. Why do you think it lends itself to this subject matter? I mean, you're also a writer of comic books. Yeah. You write the Black Panther series.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's, that's a great question. That's a really, really great question. Okay, so I'll just speak for myself. I felt like in nonfiction, and this is not to say I'll never go back to it, but I felt like I was coming dangerously close to repeating myself. I felt like the methodology through which I was exploring stories, which was to go out and, do the journalism, do the historical research, analyze, synthesize, tell you what I thought. Probably shortly after we were 8 years in power, and when, we got our current president, I felt like I can't do this, anymore. Like, I can't keep doing, the same thing. And when I came to fiction, it was, the opportunity, I felt like, and even though the novel was in process by then, to talk about these things, but in a much more layered way. I felt like I had much more, sort of control. I felt like, it could apply to, other things. I think thinking back to myself as a young person and a comic book fan, I think the imagination is very, very important, when you come from an oppressed class. I think when I was maybe about 22, 23, maybe a little older, I read Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist, and the way in which he just, interpreted African-American history, with these, two different schools. I thought, wow, I can't believe somebody did that. I didn't even know this was possible within fiction, and so I probably was, inspired by stories, like that. It just felt like the natural way to go.
Another novel use of words in your book is when you're talking about slave masters and slaves, the quality and the task. Could you talk about that as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, that actually goes back to your earlier question about, how slavery is actually presented in the book. So, as I said, I started this book in 2009, and one of the things my editor immediately said to me when I told him what I was going to do, he said, listen, you're going into territory people have written about quite a bit. And so I think anytime you write a book, this is true, even in nonfiction, you're writing about a theme a lot of times that, folks have tackled, you have to make it yours. You have to figure out, okay, what is Ta-Nehisi Coates' vision of, say, police brutality in 2015 to make it into Between the World and Me? How do you not just, sound like some dude who, read some, James Baldwin and decided I'm going to go right? Same thing here. How do you sound like, how do you not sound like, somebody that read Beloved and say, hey, I'm going to try to do that? And so a large part of that is not just rendering enslavement, but rendering my vision of enslavement. And part of rendering my vision of enslavement is figuring out, a vocabulary that speaks to it in a particular way. And so that's why, there are different names. You have, your enslaved are called the task. The enslavers are called the quality. Those, are whites who don't have, the luxury of owning people are referred to as the low whites. And so I thought all of that was really, really important to give a different vocabulary and a different, sense of where we were.
And the decline of the plantation. Talk about that.
Sure. So there is a subtle and slight, I think, parable about ecology and about climate change in there. And one of the things that, happens in this novel is Virginia, the state, grows rich off of tobacco. In the world of this novel, it grows, rich off of, tobacco that slaves farm and, cut and, hang and et cetera. And the tobacco exhausts the land. And as the land is exhausted, the wealth which all of these Virginia planters are living off of begins to exhaust itself too. And so what they do is they turn to something else. They start selling people. And, a lot of the characters just comment on the fact of, how long can this go on? Because what folks are basically doing is once they exhaust one area, they move west. So within the history of this novel, they move from Virginia to Tennessee to Mississippi. The characters are always afraid of being sent Natchez way because that's where the land is rich and it's blooming. But in the mind of slaves, they'll exhaust that too. And the very fact that they have turned from enslaving people to actually cultivating and selling people, is a commentary in and of itself.
So here you are for 10 years writing this novel at the same time that you're writing these paradigm-shattering essays and books that are getting so much attention. And so it's all coming together. In the midst of all this, you testify before Congress around the issue of reparations. And you have Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell responding to the issue. When you were last in, we had you respond. But I'm wondering now, as The Water Dancer comes out, and as you deeply dove into this issue in a different way, in a fictional way, your thoughts on what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said. I want to just play that clip.
Sure.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate. We've had waves of immigrants as well who've come to the country and experienced dramatic discrimination of one kind or another. So, no, I don't think reparations are a good idea.
And again, I want to point out that Mitch McConnell was being questioned by an African-American reporter, by Eva McKend of Spectrum News, about whether the government should issue a public apology for slavery. So in light of this and just this deep world that you've been living in, both imaginary and very, very real.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, you know, that commentary actually gets to one of the themes of the book, and that is the idea that you get to forget the things that you don't like. Anytime, you know, someone makes an anti-reparations argument, almost 95% of the time, what undergirds that is the idea that one can have an a la carte approach to history. So Mitch McConnell would never say, you know, George Washington died a long time ago, so therefore, you know, we shouldn't, you know, pay any attention to George Washington. We shouldn't have President's Day. He wouldn't say Thomas Jefferson died a long time ago, therefore, you know, we shouldn't pay any attention to Thomas Jefferson. He wouldn't say that, you know, there were treaties that were signed before any of us are alive, so therefore, you know, we're out of those treaties. He wouldn't say that pensioners, you know, who are still alive from, say, World War II, even though, you know, the vast majority of us, you know, weren't alive, you know, to fight that war, should no longer have to pay. And so the very idea that history should not matter, if we were to apply that rule across the board and not just to reparations, it'd be tough to have a state in and of itself at all. Part of being part of a state is being responsible to things that you don't directly do, be they things that happened across time and history, or be they things that happened across, you know, time and space. You know, my tax dollars goes to subsidize, you know, highways that I may or may not make, you know, utilization. That's what it means to be part of a state. The second, you know, fallacy in that is that somehow the oppression of African Americans ended in 1865 and does not, you know, extend up into the lifetime of Mitch McConnell, which I tried to make clear, you know, during my testimony that, in fact, that is quite false. This would be an entirely different conversation had this country done in 1865, which what Frederick Douglass asked it to do, which is to let the enslaved, you know, alone and let them prosper. That's not what happened. In fact, what followed was a 100-year, century-long terrorism campaign, which was backed by policy at the federal, state, and local level. The folks who suffered under those policies are very much alive today. And so one of the things I wanted to get to in the water dance, with what I was tackling, was this idea that, you know, you can be opportunistic about memory, that Hiram's father, you know, who lives off of the slave labor of all of these, you know, people, can remember the quote-unquote greatness of the folks that founded the plantation while ignoring what, you know, all of that, you know, wealth and greatness was actually based on in the first place, while ignoring, you know, what he did, you know, to this enslaved woman. That is a problem that I feel like is with us across the board. It's not just a race problem. It haunts all of our policy, this inability to grapple with history.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, his first novel, The Water Dancer, came out today. Tune in Wednesday for part 2 of our conversation when he talks about the 2020 presidential race, politicians using blackface, from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, and more. To watch Ta-Nehisi Coates testify on Capitol Hill about reparations, go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Libby Rainey, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Taymari Astudio, and Maria Taracena. Mike DeFilippo and Miguel Noguera are engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grand, David Prude, Ishmael Darrow, Vesta Godars, and Carl Marxer. And to our camera crew, John Randolph, Karen Meadows, Ann Osbeck, and Matt Ely. To see all our climate action summer coverage so far, you can go to democracynow.org. We are video and audio podcasting. Again, go to our website and go to our social media. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.